You walk into an ancient house and notice strange symbols carved into the walls. At first, they seem random, just old scratches in the wood. But then you realize, these marks were put there for a reason. Centuries ago, people believed witches and dark spirits roamed freely. And to protect themselves, they carved symbols of power into their homes. These were not decorations, they were shields against the unseen. Some were meant to trap evil spirits, forcing them to wander endlessly. Others called upon divine protection, invoking names of saints and angels. Some were designed to confuse witches, stopping their spells before they could take hold. And a few? A few were believed to hold such power that no dark force could pass beyond them. But as time passed, the fear of witches faded, and these symbols were forgotten. Until now, when old buildings are being restored, and these ancient marks are being uncovered once again. Were they just superstition, or did they truly work? And more importantly, do they still hold power today? Let's uncover the lost history of witches' marks, what they meant, how they were used, and why they are being rediscovered now. Because once you know what to look for, you may start seeing them everywhere. For as long as humans have feared the unknown, they have sought ways to protect themselves. Some turned to prayers, others to rituals, and some, perhaps the most desperate, took blades to stone and wood, carving symbols that they believed could shield them from dark forces. These were witches' marks, protective sigils etched into doorways, hearths, and hidden corners, meant to ward off evil, trap wandering spirits, and confuse those who practiced dark magic. Their presence is a haunting reminder of a time when belief in witchcraft was not just folklore, but a very real fear. In medieval Europe, homes were not just built for shelter, they were fortresses against the unseen. And every window, every doorway, every place where something could slip in unnoticed had to be protected. These carvings, small and unassuming, held the weight of their maker's terror. They were more than just scratches in wood. They were silent prayers, desperate warnings, last lines of defense. To understand their significance, we must step back into the world that created them, a world where witchcraft was not a myth, but a crime, and where accusations could mean death. The fear of witches reached its height between the 16th and 19th centuries, when trials and executions spread across Europe like wildfire. Every misfortune, a failed harvest, an unexplained illness, a sudden death, needed an explanation. And when no natural cause could be found, people turned to the supernatural. If witches could bring ruin, there had to be a way to stop them. And so, the practice of carving protective symbols into homes became widespread. These marks were carefully placed, always near entry points, doors, windows, chimneys, and even barns, where it was believed evil spirits could slip through unnoticed. Some marks were deeply personal, linked to religious beliefs and sacred texts. Others followed patterns passed down through generations, symbols known only to those who had spent their lives learning the secret ways of protection. And then there were the ones whose meanings remain a mystery. But not all marks were meant to protect. Some symbols, those burned into flesh rather than carved into wood, were different. These were the devil's marks, signs said to be left on the bodies of those who had made pacts with dark forces. Witches, it was believed, bore these marks as proof of their allegiance. A mole, a scar, a birthmark in the wrong place could be all the evidence needed to condemn someone to death. Unlike the protective sigils found on buildings, these marks were a curse rather than a shield, and their presence in history speaks to the dangers of paranoia and blind superstition. So what were these symbols? How did they work, and what did they mean? To truly understand witches' marks, we must look at them one by one, tracing their origins, their purpose, and the fear that gave them power. Some were tied to faith, calling upon divine forces for protection. Others were geometric traps, designed to ensnare spirits and render them powerless. And a few carried such weight that even today, those who find them carved into old buildings hesitate to disturb them. To understand witches' marks, we must first understand the fear that created them. These symbols were not decorations, they were born out of desperation, carved into homes, churches, and even gravestones to keep evil at bay. Some were simple and hastily scratched into wood, while others were intricate and carefully designed, passed down through generations as secret knowledge. Each mark had a purpose, a meaning, a reason why those who made them believed they could stand against dark forces. One of the earliest and most mysterious marks is the Alcaz cross. Unlike the more familiar Christian cross, the Alcaz cross was associated with the night sky and celestial protection. Used primarily in Eastern Europe, it was believed to channel the power of the stars, using their eternal light to banish darkness. People who carved this symbol near their doors and windows hoped that it would prevent witches from entering, trapping them in an endless void of night where their magic would be powerless. Even today, these marks can still be found in the oldest homes of rural villages, their presence a silent echo of the past. But not all witches' marks were tied to the cosmos. Some relied on divine purity, calling upon the Virgin Mary for protection. One of the most widespread symbols was the double V, also known as the Virgins of Virtue mark. This symbol, consisting of two overlapping V shapes, stood for Virgo Virginum, a reference to Mary's purity. Medieval believers thought that Mary's presence could shield a home from evil. And by carving this symbol near doors and hearths, they hoped to ensure that no wicked force could take hold within. Still, other marks took a more mathematical approach to protection. The daisy wheel, also called the hexafoil, is one of the most common witches' marks found in old buildings. This six-petal design looks like a simple flower, but it hides something much more complex. The lines within the daisy wheel form an endless, looping pattern, a shape that was believed to be a trap for spirits. The idea was that if a witch or a malevolent entity tried to enter, they would become caught in the never-ending curves of the symbol, unable to move forward or escape. Some believed that spirits would wander forever within the design, unable to focus long enough to cast a spell or bring harm. Even in modern times, some builders still use the daisy wheel as a protective charm, embedding it in structures to ensure safety. But among all these marks, one stands out as the most misunderstood: the pentagram. Today, the pentagram is often associated with occultism, Satanism, and modern witchcraft, but its original use was entirely different. In medieval Europe, the 5-point star was a Christian symbol, representing the 5 wounds of Christ. It was thought to provide divine protection, acting as a shield against dark magic. Unlike other witches' marks, which were often hidden, the pentagram was boldly carved into churches and doorways, a declaration that no evil could pass. However, as religious beliefs evolved and the association between pentagrams and esoteric practices grew, the meaning of the symbol changed, leading to its modern connection with witchcraft rather than protection from it. Protection was not always enough. While some witches' marks were meant to shield homes and churches from supernatural harm, others were designed to trap, confuse, or repel malevolent forces entirely. These symbols weren't just barriers, they were weapons, meant to ensnare witches, stop their spells, and prevent spirits from crossing into places where they weren't welcome. One of the most common and deceptively simple marks was the crisscross lines, also known as the saltire. These intersecting lines formed an X, often carved into stone or wood near windows and doors. The belief was that evil entities would be unable to move past the crossing point, becoming disoriented by the intersecting paths. Much like a spider's web, the crisscross pattern trapped negative forces in place, preventing them from entering a home or casting their influence on those inside. These marks are still found in medieval churches and homes, scratched into door frames and fireplaces, standing as silent guards against threats unseen. But when it came to truly confusing and trapping spirits, few marks were as powerful as the maze or labyrinth. Throughout history, labyrinths have appeared in Greek mythology, medieval architecture, and sacred sites, symbolizing the journey of the soul and the quest for wisdom. But in the case of witches' marks, their purpose was far more tactical. It was believed that spirits and witches, once caught in the design, would be unable to find their way out. The idea was that malevolent entities were not intelligent enough to navigate the endless pathways, forcing them to wander indefinitely instead of harming the home's inhabitants. Some labyrinth designs were deeply intricate, almost hypnotic in their complexity, while others were simple spirals meant to slow or confuse supernatural forces. But not all marks were purely symbolic, some carried deep personal significance. Many families of the time carved their own initials into wooden beams and stone foundations, believing that this would imprint their spiritual presence into the structure. The idea was that, by placing their names within their homes, they were asserting dominance over the space, making it impossible for witches or spirits to take control. Often, these initials were accompanied by dates, sigils, or religious markings, further strengthening their protective effect. In some cases, entire family lineages were marked onto doorways, as if to declare, "This is our home. No darkness may enter here." One of the most powerful forms of protection was the use of religious phrases inscribed into the very fabric of a building. These words, often taken from the Bible or other sacred texts, were believed to invoke divine protection, ensuring that nothing unholy could enter. Passages from Psalms, the Lord's Prayer, or even single words like Sanctus, holy, were carved into doorways, mantles, and walls. The belief was that evil forces could not withstand the presence of sacred language, making these inscriptions some of the most effective forms of supernatural defense. But among all these symbols, one stands out as particularly ancient and enigmatic: the Solomon's Knot. This intricate, interwoven design, composed of endless loops with no clear beginning or end, was associated with King Solomon, a biblical figure known for his wisdom and mastery over spirits. For centuries, witches' marks were carved into wood, stone, and metal, not as decorations, but as shields against unseen forces. Every mark held meaning, every symbol was a message to the spirits: "Stay out. You are not welcome here." But as time moved forward, the world changed. The fear of witches and dark magic faded, and the marks that once protected homes were slowly forgotten. The shift began during the Enlightenment, when science, reason, and logic replaced superstition. People no longer looked to carved symbols for protection; instead, they turned to medicine, law, and philosophy. Witch trials ended, belief in curses declined, and many of these symbols were simply ignored. Some were covered up, painted over, or erased entirely. Others survived, but with no one left to understand their meaning, they became nothing more than strange scratches in old buildings. But even though belief in witches faded, one thing remained: the marks themselves. In recent years, as old houses, churches, and barns have been restored, something unexpected has happened: people are finding witches' marks again. Hidden beneath centuries of dust and decay, these symbols are reappearing on doorways, fireplaces, and wooden beams. These discoveries are sparking curiosity and debate. Historians, archaeologists, and even modern practitioners of magic have taken notice, trying to piece together their original purpose. Some marks were found exactly where they were expected, on the thresholds of medieval homes, above the hearth where families once gathered for warmth and safety. But others have been discovered in unexpected places, raising more questions than answers. Why were some of these symbols found deep inside caves, where no one lived? Why were they carved into gravestones, marking the dead rather than protecting the living? This revival of interest has extended beyond historians and scholars. Many modern pagan, Wiccan, and occult practitioners have begun to explore witches' marks, seeing them as more than just relics of the past. Some believe that these symbols still hold power, that the ancient knowledge embedded within them can still be used today. Others see them as a way to reconnect with the beliefs of their ancestors. Whether they are seen as historical artifacts or remnants of a lost magical tradition, one thing is certain: witches' marks are no longer forgotten. And with each discovery, the question grows stronger: were these marks merely superstition? Or did they once hold a power that we no longer understand? But perhaps the real question isn't whether the marks worked in the past. Perhaps the real question is this: if you knew your home was at risk from forces beyond your control, would you carve one today?